Now, we've already talked about, and I'm making it small just so I can have everything on one page. We've talked about perimeter. Perimeter just means add up the sides. What kind of units did perimeter have? Simple, plain. So P for perimeter stood for plain units. So perimeter has inches, feet, yards, miles. They just had plain units for perimeter. What kind of units did we just say that area has?
Squared.
Inches squared, feet squared, yards squared, miles squared. Now, we're getting ready to talk about volume. Volume is going to have inches cubed, feet cubed, yards cubed, miles cubed. So I kind of have it in order for you. It's inches to the first, inches to the second, inches to the third. So they're in order on the formula sheet the way that it needs to be. Now the one that's not in order is the circles. This one is area. Right here it says area, so it follows the rules of area, which is inches squared, feet squared, yards squared. The other three, this one, and this one, they are all plain. Inches, feet, yards, miles. So when you're doing your units, it's plain units, squared units, cube units, but circles are all plain except for area. Area matches up with area up there. So the circles are a little bit different. But it's plain units, squared units, cube units, and then all plain except for the area. Because they will mark you wrong if you don't put the right units. Now, we're going to talk for a minute about volume. And I'm not going to spend too terribly long because, hold on. Let me cut and let me paste. All right, here are your volume formulas. Let me add a page. Let me cut, add a page. Let me explain what the volume formulas are before we move on. A rectangular prism, that is the same thing as a box, a three-dimensional box. Okay? You have your length, your width, and your height. Easy breezy. A circular cylinder is the same thing as a can. Like a soup can or a Pepsi can. Now, go ahead and get this in your brain. Do not use the formulas that are out to the side. I put them there because Alex uses them. They will get you in trouble. So, you only use the formulas that are up close and personal. Do not use the formulas out to the side. So we are only going to use the ones that are up close and personal. That capital V is going to get you in trouble. So for the can, it says pi. Pi is equal to what? 3.14. What do you think H stands for? And what do you think R stands for? So if we have a soup can, the height is how tall it is. And the radius is talking about through a circle. So you find the circle and you go halfway across. If it tells you all the way across, you cut it in half. If it tells you halfway across, you use it. So, if we were dealing with a can, my height would be how tall it is. And my radius would be halfway through a circle. Now, a sphere is a ball. We've all taken history classes where they talk about the hemisphere, the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. That's the top half of the ball and the bottom half of the ball. Now, the formula says 4/3 pi, pi is 3.14, radius cubed. So my radius is going to be halfway through the ball. A cone. A cone can either be an ice cream cone or it can be a dunce hat. Both of those are cones. The formula says 1/3 times pi times r, so you've got to know halfway through the circle. And you've got to know the height. Your height is how tall it is. So these are just plug and chug formulas. Okay? Let me come down here and show you, and I'm not going to spend, like I said, a long time on it. First thing you've got to do is figure out what it is. Is this a prism, a cylinder, a sphere, or a cone? A who? A cylinder. This one is a can. So we don't use this one, we use the one that's up close and personal. The formula says pi times r squared times h. What do we plug in for pi? 3.14. What is our radius going to be? How do we get the radius? First of all, what is 17? 17 is going to be our diameter. So our radius is going to be 17 cut in half. So if I go to my calculator and I do 17 cut in half, 8.5 is going to be my radius. And the formula says I need to square it. What is my height going to be? 51. And I literally plug that into my calculator. Cool? So I go to my calculator and I do 3.14 times 8.5 to the second times 51. There's my answer. Now this says round to the nearest whole number. What digit would I underline for the whole number? The whole dollar. So the 1 tells the 0 to stay the same. What kind of units do I have for volume? To the third. Cool? Alright. This is still a can. The only difference is the can fell down. So what is your radius? 2. What is your height? 16. Let's do another one. Copy. Paste. What shape is this? This is a cone. We don't use the ones out. So volume equals 1/3 times pi times r squared times h. So 1/3 times 3.14 times, what is my radius? 3, because this is only going halfway across, which is what I want. What is my height? 10. I plug that in the calculator. Making sure that when you have a fraction, you wrap that fraction up. Times 3.14 times 3 to the second times 10. There's your answer. Yay? These are not that bad once you know how to use the formula. Okay, paste. What shape, let me come down and do, what shape is this one?
Sphere.
That one is a sphere, a ball, hemisphere. So its volume equals 4/3 times pi times r to the third. So 4/3 times 3.14 times, what is my radius?
That would be 15.6 divided by 2.
Good. If this is the diameter, my radius is going to be 15.6 divided by 2. So if I go to my calculator, 15.6 divided by 2 is going to give me 7.8, and the formula says cubit to the third. So 4/3 is part of my formula. I wrap it up because it's a fraction, times 3.14 times 7.8 to the third. Now it says round to the nearest tenth. Round to the 10th. 1986 point, who? 8. And my units are going to be millimeters, but because it's volume, it is going to be millimeters cubed, millimeters to the third. Cool? Those are not that bad once you know how to use the formulas. Square roots. Do we know what square roots are? Yeah. What's the square root of 64?
8.
What's the square root of 81? What's the square root of 16?
4.
Okay? If you don't know square roots, that just means what number times itself gives you the number in the house. Your calculator has a square root button. Your square root button is right above the squared button. So my square root button is right here. So it's in blue, so we hit the blue button or the second button, and then we hit that button. So to do the square root, I'm going to hit second square root and then type in 64. Or second square root and type in 81. Cool? Now, sometimes they're pretty square roots, which is what I call these, and sometimes they're not pretty square roots. So if they're not pretty square roots, it'll tell you, hey, this is not a pretty square root, just round it. So I would do the square root of 20, and then I would do the square root of 90. And this says round it to the nearest hundredth. So my hundredth is going to be 2 places behind the decimal. So the 2 tells the 7 and the 6 tells the 8. So what's the first one going to be? 4.4.
8. Oh, it's 7.
7 and 9.49.
9.
Cool? Now, Alex makes this next one super hard. It says between what 2 consecutive? Consecutive means back to back. I'm a Carolina fan, but my husband, we're total opposites. He's a Clemson fan, so he'll say, we're back-to-back state championships. We're consecutive state, so that means back-to-back. So they want to know between what 2 numbers, what 2 whole numbers, does the square root of 137 lie? So if I'm going to do the square root of 137, Alex makes it so much harder than it is. Y'all, if you have $11 and some change, that means you have between $11 and $12. That's your answer. That's all they want to know. If you have $11 and some change, you have between $11 and $12. So for the next one, if I do square root of 50, square root of 50, I have $7 and some change. So I have between $7 and $8. That's it. Done. Now, I did mention just a minute ago about Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The main thing you have to remember, c must be across from the right angle. That's called your hypotenuse. C has to be across from the right angle. So in this problem, my C is going to be X. I don't care what you call A and B. You can call either one of those can be A and B. So I'm going to do 9 squared plus 12 squared. As long as C, I can identify. I don't care about A and B. You can call either one A and either one B. But C has to be across from the right angle. There's Hardy's. Okay? Got to have it across from the right angle. So I go to my calculator. Oops, hit the wrong button. And I'm going to do 9 to the second power. And I'm going to do 12 to the second power. And I'm going to add those 2 numbers, 81 plus 144. So I have 81, which is this, 144, which is this, and that equals x squared. Well, then, when I add these two numbers, that gives me 225 equals x squared. Well, this is where a lot of y'all want to stop and say, hey, I'm done. The problems didn't say solve for x squared. The problem says find x. So the way that you find x is you take the square root. A square and a square root cancel each other out. That's why they're on the same button. So, square and square root, they're on the same button. So to get my answer, I'm going to do the square root of 225. There's my final answer, 15. Now, let me do one more. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. First thing I want you to do is identify the c. The c in this problem is going to be 10. Your c is always across from the right angle. I don't care what you call a and b, so I'm going to call a x and I'm going to call b 8. What is 8 times 8? And 10 times 10? Now, my goal is to get x by itself. In this last problem, do you see that x was already by itself? So I just added up these numbers? Well, do you agree in this problem, x is not by itself? So what do I have to do to get x by itself? Subtract 64 to get x by itself. So 100 minus 64 gives me 36. Am I done? No. What do I have to do to get x? Take the square root. So what is my final answer going to be? What's the square root of 36? There's your final answer. And we're going to do more of those. I just wanted to give you a little touch of them for those of you who are already there. Now, we have our test. So as soon as you get down there, cell phones up, not in sight, papers up. The only thing that you need is if you have a physical calculator, you can have that out. No cell phone calculators. A physical calculator and something to write with. I will give you Scratch. I will give you a formula sheet. You can go ahead and log in and get to that page that says to put in your password.